Hey there, it's Andrea from Pocket Family Psychologist. So here today to answer your question about thinking about the impact of trauma on the parent and how that impacts on parenting. It's quite apt. I mean, I'm feeling a bit stressed today. I had to rush around this morning, had a hospital appointment, all of this, which kind of left me feeling quite stressed. But that is very different. So stress, or even chronic stress, which is kind of repeated stress, is very different to trauma. And the main reason for that is because trauma leaves a lasting impact. Whilst not always, but sometimes, depending on the reaction, trauma can leave a lasting impact long after danger has passed. So let me explain. There's roughly two categories of trauma that we work with. One is post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and that's the more common. That's when we know about that. You know, when you've witnessed something life-threatening, or you've experienced something life-threatening, and then you get symptoms which include hypervigilance, so sort of staying on alert, waiting for the next dangerous thing to come, or you get intrusive images, dreams or thoughts or body feelings related to the trauma. You start to avoid anything that reminds you of that traumatic event, and your mood gets affected. You can get quite down and withdrawn, and get quite irritable and angry, actually, is a common thing. So that's PTSD, and then we have complex trauma, which is where trauma, it can be a threat to your life or physical harm, but it could also be neglect and the absence of care. But the important bit of that is that it happens early in life, normally within your caregiving relationships. And it was pretty repeated, and you weren't really able to escape as a child. You didn't have any control or way out of that. So both PTSD and complex trauma can have significant impact on parenting. And with complex trauma, the difficulties can be similar to PTSD, although sometimes people don't have flashbacks or sort of dreams, but they will have additional difficulties with relationships and managing their emotions. Their sort of fear response gets triggered easily. They might find it very difficult to trust, or to make themselves vulnerable within a relationship, or as a parent or as a partner. So both are very important to think about. And just to be clear, not everyone that experiences a trauma goes on to develop PTSD or complex trauma. There's lots of factors that kind of get it, will help mediate whether it turns into PTSD. But let's think about, both can have a significant impact on parenting. Things we commonly see here in therapy would be a parent that's kind of quite angry and irritable. They can be quite unpredictable for the child, so something that the child won't be able to make sense of creates an angry or irritable response that may relate to the trauma. The child has no idea, and then the child can end up blaming themselves. So that kind of unpredictable irritability and anger. Or there's the parents that kind of withdraw into themselves. Again, that can be quite unpredictable when they withdraw, where they maybe perhaps numb, cut off, aren't emotionally available, and maybe use things like alcohol or drugs, painkillers, to numb that kind of fear response, or kind of that being on guard that they feel a lot. The other thing we sometimes see is that the parent, and we've talked about this recently on one of my blog posts, but you can get triggered easily by your child's needs, or a child's cry, or when a child's angry with you, if that relates to your early trauma, that can trigger part of your traumatic response, and then you can end up acting quite childlike yourself, or your early needs take kind of priority, and you're not able to stay in the parent position for your child. So we have a blog post on dealing with your inner child that relates a little bit to that. So that's kind of the impact it can have on parenting. And so I'm just, for the first time, I'm actually able to have a little look, and hello to those guys that are joining live. Thank you. So the second area is that trauma has a way of repeating itself, even when we try desperately hard not to. That if it's not understood and dealt with, if you just kind of shove it to the back of your mind and hope that you'll forget about it, it won't. And it has this uncanny habit of replaying itself across generations. So we see this all the time. Families end up repeating traumas that belong to a previous generation even. Unless we deal with it, there's a good chance it'll get played out. And then the other impact it can have on parenting is if the trauma happens, if it's current, if it happens within the child's family, it can create all sorts of structural changes to that family. So, maybe it brings a particular parent or someone who is obviously important in that family, their role changes, the structure of the family changes, the rules in the family change, and that can be a massive a blow or just an issue that we have to think about and manage when we're thinking about the impact of trauma on children and families. So let me give you a few different examples. It's probably the easiest way to kind of explain how we see trauma, parents' trauma, impacting on families. So one family we worked with, and this case study is on our website actually, take a look. But so we worked with this really lovely family, and the dad had a very serious and life-changing accident that had been witnessed by some other members of the family. So the first thing we had to deal with, where there was a couple of the family members were having a lot of flashbacks, sort of memories of the event. Sleep was disturbed because there was nightmares and family members weren't wanting to go to sleep. They didn't want to remember this event. There was generally a kind of heightened sense of fear. The children didn't want to leave home, didn't want to leave their parents, didn't want to go out and play because they were worried about something bad happening. And there was an avoidance, so staying away from any reminders of that traumatic event. So we dealt with that using more the normal traditional trauma therapies. So there's two main ones that are sort of government approved, if you like. One is CBT and the other is EMDR, which is the one I love. We do use bits of CBT, but EMDR is one of my favourites. So we used EMDR, we helped address, and the flashbacks stopped, the avoidance stopped. But what was left underneath, interestingly, was some real anger and loss, actually, but fury, actually, at the changes that had been made in this family and what the devastation that had been caused, and how everybody had changed, not just the person that was injured. And so what we did was some family sessions where we saw that everyone was cross about how the dad had changed and what that meant. But really importantly, Mum had, because she come so close to losing some of her family and saw how easy that could happen, she had sort of checked out a bit and was no longer being the boss of her family. And she was too frightened to care, too frightened to love again, because people could just go. And so that had meant that other family members were kind of taken over and not doing such a good job. So a really pivotal moment in our work was that Mum saying, right, that's it, I'm back, so I'm back in control of my family, and that led to huge changes and anger reducing for that family. Another issue we would often see is where there's been a trauma associated with the birth. So maybe an infant, maybe the pregnancy has been very traumatic, or the birth has been traumatic, or a child has nearly died. And that can make it very difficult, because the mum is often quite depressed following that, or struggles to relate because they're feeling quite numb and zoned out, and that can have an impact on the attachment relationship. Also, that just becomes an area that is no longer up for discussion. Everyone knows it's too prickly and everyone avoids it, and that can create all sorts of tension in relationships. One final I don't want to go on too much, but a final example is we often see with foster carers or adoptive carers where a child maybe has been pretty violent towards a parent. That has become traumatic for the parent, and then every time the child kind of just ups the ante a bit, the parent gets triggered and they think, well, here we go, and they sort of go into their trauma response. And so sometimes we have to do trauma therapy with parents to help them realise that that's over now. The child is past that stage. That won't happen again, and you can stay in your strong parenting sort of position. So that's a few examples. Just wanted to look at someone's comment there. Any information I could send, have a look on our website. I have two websites. So there's Pocket Family Psychologists and there's Shortland Psychology Associates. And on Shortland Psychology, there might be some more information useful there for your to give to a teacher. Otherwise, DM me and I will try and see if I can find some more information that would be useful. But there's the National Centre for Traumatic Stress. I'm rubbish at remembering names. I'd have to look that up. But yeah, DM me if this isn't enough. So what to do about it? I mean, the first thing is to understand the trauma, to recognise it, to begin to be able to regulate your threat brain. So we have an article on our resources page on Pocket Family Psychologist about managing your threat brain, so that you don't keep getting triggered and thrown off into that kind of panic danger response. But there's lots of other good books out there. I mean, there's a little one here actually. Has just arrived, which is called Trauma is Strange, and it's a little sort of a comic-y kind of, and it gives you it explains the impact that trauma has on the brain and the system. Another lovely book I like is Deborah Lee's Compassion Focused Therapy, or Compassion Focused Approach for PTSD. It's really good too. So I would have a look, read around, and see if you think that you need help. And if you do, I really recommend EMDR, just in that it's quite, it can be, depending on the nature of the trauma, it can be pretty quick. You can, it gets you through the trauma work. Yeah, it's sort of a bit faster than other approaches sometimes. Anyway, okay, I'm going to stop there. So that's a bit of a flavour. If there's any more specific questions, please DM me. I can either address them next week or just do some Insta posts this week about it. But as always, lovely to see you and have a good weekend. All right.